Hello, everybody. Welcome to XenTegra IGEL Weekly. This is episode 61. I am Patrick Toner. I'm filling in for Andy Whiteside this week, who could not join us. And I'm joined by our familiar co-host, Chris Feeney. Chris, how you doing, man?
Greetings, Patrick. Doing all right. Um, Sometimes I'm like, when was the last time I was on the podcast? Because it feels like the last few weeks has been part of it's been just August is always when school starts and getting, at least these days, getting my daughter back to college and traveling to get her squared away. And I've had a few trips as well lately on the road. So, but this week I'm not traveling, so I'm happy about that, getting caught up on some stuff. Uh, and then today's topic is kind of something I'll be actually speaking on next week at VMware Explore. I almost called it VMware. Yeah, I think that was the last time I was in San Francisco was 2019 VMworld. I'm almost certain. Yeah, it would have been that because that was just before the onslaught of the pandemic. But anywho,
It's, people say it's hard to gauge time over the last 2 years, right? Do you find that yourself? Like, 2019, if you were living back in 2019, it was easy to be like, oh, yeah, that happened 2 years ago. This happened 3 years ago. But these last few years are just kind of a weird blur, kind of like my background here. It's very blurry.
Yeah, I mean, there are some, especially after not doing something for a while and then going back into, so for example, travel, used to do it more frequently, and then it just shut down for at least a year and a half, with very little trips and just kind of going back and just dealing with, my personal thing was I noticed, for example, just going to parking all of a sudden just people started traveling again and bam, the parking lots are full again, whereas they used to be ghost towns there for a short time. But then restaurants haven't quite caught up yet. People either don't have enough people to work. The hours are, they're shutting down at 5 p.m. and you want to get dinner at the airport or something, and you're like, nobody's open except for Starbucks, perhaps. And I'm not really sure I want the muffin for dinner. So, first world problems, obviously.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, just little things, and it just looking back, it's like pause and reflecting on what really has happened the last couple of years. But what's interesting is part of the topic we're going to be talking about today is also kind of translating into this whole idea of sustainability, right? The ability to extend the life of devices. We talk about this a lot, but the benefits that have come about from that. I've got a lot of friends in commercial real estate, and we were just talking about this because Raleigh's had buildings go up, and I keep thinking to myself, well, somebody's got to rent that space in these buildings. These are like not 4-story buildings; these are like 18, 20-story buildings. I'm like, have they rented the buildings out? Do they have companies that are actually going to have people coming in and using the space? It does make me wonder in this new way of working that we have seen. And Raleigh's growing more specifically, but I do wonder, with the freedom that you get from working anywhere or having a device that you can take with you, or um, what is that balance going to look like? And so, and also the onslaught of the cloud computing, just the massive uptick in usage there. So we'll kind of get into a little bit about that today in our discussion. So, but yeah, what do we got on tap, my friend? What's the blog we're going to be talking about today?
Yeah, so let me share this out. So we've got we're going to be talking about an IGEL blog today on sustainability. To your point, see the screen okay there for anyone who's
it's my buddy James Regan.
James Regan, I think, is it O'Regan?
James O'Regan. Yes.
Clearly not Irish. Must not.
No, yeah, definitly. No.
Must be your Italian rep over at IGEL.
That's right. Yeah, he's gonna. I won't tell him we talked about his blog.
Hey, listen, I'm genetically about as Irish as they come. I did my what do you call it? The Ancestry.com DNA test.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, well, so and we won't take too long on this, but my mom didn't know her biological father. It was this whole thing. So she did her DNA test, got connected with people that we knew his last name. I was like, oh, that's pretty weird. So then I did one. It is pretty amazing how accurate it is. And
Wow.
I was able to meet people that I was related to. But basically it was like it shows you a map, like, hey, where are you from? And it's like just Ireland, a little bit of Scotland, and that was pretty much it for me. I think there might have been a little dot in Norway or something, but it was yeah. And I didn't know. Growing up, I wasn't entirely sure.
I could
Everyone
easily
has
see you being an extra in Braveheart easily, or maybe Robin Hood, perhaps, but
right.
the Kevin Costner version one, that one.
Oh, what a great movie! What a great movie.
That was a
Yeah,
good one.
or Men in Tights. Men in Tights
But
also took the
I haven't
bar
seen that
high.
one. What are you talking about?
Oh, you've never seen Robin Hood Men in Tights? Oh
I'm
my
sure
gosh,
parts of it.
it's a
Maybe I'll find it on
classic.
YouTube.
I think it was a
But
Mel Brooks.
oh
It was like a
yeah,
satire version of the Kevin Costner one.
yeah.
It
Oh
was pretty good.
Mel, yeah, certainly satire. My son recently discovered what was it? Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
I
So
was like,
so Robin Hood Men in Tights is in the spirit animal of one of those types of movies.
like
It's very
Spaceballs or whatever.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, very, very good.
All
Anyway,
right.
we've gone way
But
off the
yeah,
rails here. Thank
way.
you.
Let's get back.
Thank you, James O'Regan, for taking us off the rails there. All right, so we're going to be talking about sustainability today. We're going to be talking about, something I really think about IGEL. It's kind of been in that space from its inception, or at least when IGEL moved from hardware company to software company. Being
Mm-hmm.
able to kind of repurpose devices. We're gonna kind of take a look at what James wrote here and go through it. But Chris, I know you mentioned before we got started, you've been kind of this is something you've been doing a little bit more research on. You've been kind of more involved in, and what are your thoughts
Yeah.
here?
So it takes me back to when I first heard of iGel, um, and or first met my first person I met was a guy named Jeff Kahlberg, who many of our listeners probably know. He's been with iGel for probably 20 years now, but he was the first U.S. employee of iGel that I met. And as we got to talking and I was beginning to learn about them, I knew that they were from Germany, for example, but I didn't quite know much about their thin client technology. But the thing that stood out to me and the light bulbs began to go off was they actually could repurpose, they could install their OS on devices that were supported and convert it. And then I started thinking about it, I was like, wow, well, if we could do these use cases just by converting, they don't have to go out and buy new hardware. They could take that and, all these lights began to click, go off. And here we are, fast forward, this is 7, 8 years, maybe 10 at this point ago. And all these other things have begun to emerge by just doing that. And to the point where we've had customers come to us and say, yeah, like one of my use cases that I've seen is they, in healthcare, they've got those roaming carts, right? They've got a monitor and they've got stuff on it, maybe a keyboard and mouse kind of thing that comes open, and they're always, if they're running around, they're running off of battery. And they've seen where by just taking the same machine that was on there running Windows and just converting it to iGel, or using a UD Pocket or whatever, that alone has allowed them to extend the life of the battery by another few hours, perhaps. And that's, shift time is generally 13 hours with maybe a couple breaks or whatever. But being able to take that, whereas they were only getting 8 hours or more out of it, constantly having to charge these things or whatever, or replace the battery, which is not cheap. So all these other benefits began to emerge and allow them to maintain the use of that machine for another 2-3 years. So I think science began to look at the details behind this, right? And so we have some resources now that really actually kind of highlight the fact that, yeah, iGel can actually bring more benefits to you besides saving money. There's other things that you do out of that. You can use less electricity, less hardware. You're not sending stuff to recycling bin. I mean, and when I first came to iGel, I was covering federal. I was down in Jacksonville, actually, your new hometown. at the Navy hospital there, and we were in the back of the room, and they were looking at replacing Teradici devices, which we can't repurpose, unfortunately. But we were trying out IGEL devices that we had brought for them to test. But in the back room, we went in the back area where the IT group is, and there was a whole closet full of Core i5, i7 devices from Dell or whatever it was. I think it was Dell, but these were like PCs. And I asked them, what's going on with these? We're going to send those to the recycling bin. I'm like, what? Like, these are your thin clients right here. They could be, and that was just one small example. And I can tell you in that room, we probably had at least 100 devices sitting there on the shelf, not being used. So there's lots of things out there where IGEL can bring this and just maintain those devices. And who cares if it's not under warranty anymore, hardware-wise? The IGEL license doesn't disappear if that device decides to belly up. You can just move it to another device. You're good to go. So,
yeah, Chris, I was gonna say, I think ultimately, right, we're talking about here is, and again, there are some political sides of this, right? So we're not going to get into all of that, but at some point it becomes about efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. And you think about the history of technology. As you were talking, I was thinking about when I was a kid, the first video game system I got, I was pretty young, was a NES, and it was like, oh my gosh, this was like incredible, right? And then the Sega Genesis and the Super Nintendo come out, and you go from 8-bit to 16-bit. Mm-hmm. I think Super Nintendo said they were 32-bit maybe. And then the Nintendo 64 comes out years later. I mean, after the PlayStation, of course. And it's like everything was doubling. Like basically technology was like going from 8-bit to 16 to 32 to 64. And the same happened in personal computers, right? Where you had, the first desktop we had as kids was about the size of a small child. And it was
it weighed about 40 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. My grandfather bought it for us. He was in the tech world, and he bought it for us. And I thought it was like the coolest thing because I could play, I think it was like NHL 97 or something on there, 98. And it had 3D graphics, and I thought it was like the coolest thing ever. But we could also, obviously it was not meant for that. It was meant for our schoolwork and things. But, but I want to say there was like, 512 megs of RAM in it, maybe, if that. And, I can't remember what the processor was, but again, processor, RAM, you're talking about doubling, tripling, quadrupling in speed. And then of course you had with processors, 2 cores, now quad core. Now we have 8 cores, all these different cores in our processors, right? In our consumer processors, not just server processors. And I guess the point I'm making is everything kind of has doubled and technology's gotten better and better and better. I guess at some point it levels off, right? At some point, until we go to something like potentially quantum computing, I don't understand that enough to even talk about it. But it's like, at some point the technology keeps doubling, tripling, getting better and better and better. To a certain point, it kind of levels off, and now it becomes about efficiency, right? It becomes about, how do you have devices that last longer or put out less energy or just more efficient devices. And it's a weird thing because, a hardware vendor, and, we obviously saw this firsthand a lot at IGEL, a hardware vendor like Dell, they don't necessarily want their devices to run for 20 years. They know that the average, sales, end of life for a device is between 3 and 5 years. That's their business model, right?
Yeah.
So something like an IGEL comes around, extends the life maybe to 7 years, right? And it's better. I mean, you could make a lot of arguments for that, right? It's less trash going into the ground. It's less.
Yeah, there's all of that. I was thinking, just as you were saying there, that model, that end user computing model, was basically built off of, Microsoft coming out with a new version of Windows every so often. And with that comes new requirements. And you would have some devices that could handle that. As you were talking about, things double, right? You could take that device that originally had Windows 7, or maybe it can upgrade to Windows 10 or jump to Windows 11. Or a device that had Windows 10, but then the next version of Windows 10, and I'll actually give an example of this next week. I've got some Lenovo laptops we bought at Best Buy that were initially on a version of Windows 10 for our kids in school, whatever, worked fine, but could not handle the next version of Windows 10 couldn't go upgraded. There wasn't enough disk space. I should have known better. It's 32 gig SSD. Needed to be at least 64 or more. But they just didn't have enough space on there. Not only that, but the processor wouldn't be able to handle it. So it was naturally like, well, what do I do? This is the laptop's fine. There's nothing wrong. The webcam works, the keyboard works, everything works. And so before I think I put Linux on there originally for my daughter. Sorry, honey. It was cheaper to put Linux on there. And she used that. All she'd really went to was like office.com, but she craved a browser, right? Or a word processor eventually. And so, I finally pulled the trigger and got her another laptop. But I was wishing I could just rent a PC or something from Windows in the cloud and just, hey, use this, kind of like we have now with AVD or Windows 365. But the hardware was fine, and I still use it. I just threw an IGEL on it today, and it's, I might actually give it to Andy's nonprofit community, Computers for Community, which we'll talk about here at some point.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Might be just a good time to segue into that. I mean, so we don't forget.
Yeah.
I mean, so everything we're talking about here, right? I mean, so everything that IGEL does, kind of in that sense of like, hey, I'm going to extend the life of hardware. I'm going to, basically make, have it so we're not, that we're not throwing out devices, recycling devices or whatever every 5 years. Maybe we're moving to 7 years. Maybe we can extend that a little bit. And that's probably better for our landfills and everything like that, right? Well, to segue into what you just mentioned, Computers for Community, that's something here at XenTegra. Andy kind of spun off another organization. It's a charity organization where you can, it's a nonprofit where you could basically, if you're in a position at a company and you're the one who's responsible for recycling devices, you can donate them to Computers for Community. They'll wipe the hard drives. And what makes them a little bit different than maybe most recyclers, they're not just going to like throw everything now into the ground and say, hey, we recycled it or whatever they do. I don't know. But Computers for Community is actually going to repurpose it. And then they donate them to other nonprofits. The cool thing is, if you're the person at the company who donates them or whatever, and you have a charity in mind that you really love, you support, tell Computers for Community and they'll reach out to them. They'll donate them to them if there's a need. So it's a really cool cause. The other thing that Computers for Community does, and I just want to mention this because I don't know of anyone else doing this, is they also have an entire, technical consulting division. So they're doing all types of services. So basically, nonprofits obviously a lot of them don't have a lot of money. There's some that have tons of money, but most don't, right? Most don't have, they're running on charity, right? They're not running on, making profits on a product or a service. So what Computers for Community does is they can offer, really great top tier engineering talent to them at a great affordable cost. So it's just a great cause overall. And I think I've seen it just growing and thriving. Pretty cool to watch over the last year that I've been at XenTegra, almost a year I've been at XenTegra. But yeah, so obviously it's just a big thing right now. A lot of people recognize the need. A lot of people, are just trying to, I guess ultimately we're talking about it a little bit beforehand, Chris, trying to be better stewards, right? That's what it really comes down to is stewardship. I know there's obviously a lot of views about this topic, but I think it just a real fundamental level. All of us want to be good stewards. We want to do what's best for, our world, our environment, whatever. And if you have a choice to make, you can either take your old devices and just dump them in the ground, or you can donate them to something like Computers for Community, and they can repurpose it and give it to an organization in need. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, it's a great point. There's a lot of stuff, not even just technology, but just other things that, somebody else could potentially use. But there is a lot of, I think, certainly awareness, right? I mean, I go back maybe 20, 30 years ago when recycling became, a thing. And I'm all behind it. I think today, if you get to what's really going on when you put that stuff in the recycling bin, what happens to that recycled stuff? I don't really know, to be honest. I know I try to put in what they say I should put in, but what happens after that? But I will try to be, if I'm in a hotel or traveling, whatever like that, and I have like plastic bottles, I will ask for or look for the recycling bin versus just using the trash can if at all possible. And I'm totally cool with that, right? I think it's a good thing. Um, but I will admit that I don't necessarily know what happens after it gets in that can, the blue one, right? With the, but in this particular scenario, I know, at least from the customers, we know that, we are at least helping them save it from going into that dumpster pile or whatever it was intended to go to. And uh and there's, like I said, there's many benefits to that. What's also really cool is when you see something like maybe a organization is building a brand new wing or a tower or whatever, and you see the green technology that's been used, right? The efficient, like you walk in a room, the lights come on after you walk out, and the lights, you know, go off after a period. I'm really actually quite cool with that. I think it's kind of cool. Um, that you're saving that. Plus LED, I've, like, for the most part in my house, I've swapped out. I was using those spiral bulbs, the ones with mercury in them. Not a fan anymore. That stuff will kill you if you're not careful. So I've swatched out to the LED lights. The cost has come down somewhat, but that LED light should last you quite a while and use less energy, and I'm totally fine with that.
So we find out in 5 years LEDs are killing us, and then we're
That's
like,
right.
hey,
why do I need these blue light glasses? Dang it! Yeah. So yeah, exactly. We all thought it was good, and disclaimer: we don't know if LED is actually a
no,
problem.
Let's make a disclaimer. That was a joke.
Yes, thank you, audience, for understanding. We got to have fun some days. So, but anyway, back to our blog.
So, Chris, back to the blog. I was reading one of the things that James was writing here, and basically he's making the point. Hey, the pandemic happened, people were working from home, and there was a reduction in carbon emissions from, obviously, people aren't driving. So I guess the two questions on that, because you mentioned commercial real estate in the beginning. What are your thoughts on, like, I know this is a huge debate in the industry. Is this actually sustainable? Is this going, not, I didn't choose the word sustainable intentionally there, but is it sustainable for people to work from home long term? And I know that a lot of companies are having that debate. Some companies are saying, hey, look, we're kind of at the end of the pandemic. You're coming back to the office. Other companies are saying, hey, we're seeing savings. We're not spending rent in all these areas. We can just basically have people work from home. They're productive. What do you think about that? And ultimately, do you think it really does drive down emissions? I think about in the kind of towards, I want to say it was like the first Christmas during COVID, maybe the second. I don't know if it was Christmas 2020 or 21. I think it was 2020. I was mostly at my house, and like I went like a few places in the beginning of the pandemic. We'd go to like our friend's house, or we'd go to our church, or whatever, but we weren't really going out, obviously the supermarket. Outside of like the basic few places we went, I didn't travel much. And then I was driving on the highway. I can't remember. I was going somewhere, and I was driving through at the time where I was living, where it was kind of the town where everything is, the mall's there. And I could not believe how much traffic there was. I mean, it was just packed. So I guess, does it actually equal less emissions? I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. But ultimately, that's not my question. My question is what are you seeing? Are people actually staying remote? Or are they, are we going back to in person or a hybrid model? What do you see with that? What do you see when you talk to your customers?
I think it's I would say hybrid at this point. We have some customers where they've gone back to maybe a flexible work schedule, or they've allowed for or said, hey, certain departments don't have to come into the office. I know that there was one organization that they did divest themselves of the old office space that they had, and they moved, just a few highway exits down the road. And the new space that they occupy, they built it up for hoteling, a lot of Zoom conference rooms, so they could allow for people to come in and work really kind of anywhere. And some folks had a dedicated office, but generally speaking, a lot of the cubicles and stuff was designed for people coming and going and in and outs. But I think you're seeing a lot of that. There's definitely, I was at in fact, a partner that we were working with at XenTegra. They are some of your sales development reps. They're making phone calls and things. They have an office space in Raleigh that they share, and we were there last week. And it's kind of a cool environment, to be honest. You've got, certainly offices, but there are a lot of cubicles, open space. But they had their dogs there. It was hanging out. Dogs are hanging out. We were having a good time, and I mean, it's just kind of a cool. And I think people liked that collaborative thing. They had a team meeting where you get together and you talk, share ideas, whatever, and then you go off and you do your work, and so, but I can be just as productive here at the house. And I think, if you found yourself and you're able to do that and, be productive and also balance that work-life thing. But sometimes the grass is not always greener, right? There are things that maybe you give up by that more flexible work schedule or work experience. So, but I think generally we're seeing that the hybrid approach come back. We have seen some. I put this out on, I think it was LinkedIn maybe or whatever, but there are some organizations where they're telling employees you got to come back. And I think about those commuting hours, especially in some of those bigger cities. I will say I went to Charlotte last week, and I was expecting at 4:00 in the afternoon when I was heading out of the city that I was going to hit traffic based on years past I've been there. It wasn't as busy as I thought it was. And I don't know if that's because some of the construction has finished or whatever, but I've been through that city at different times and it wasn't the same. Even the downtown area wasn't the same, as busy, as trafficy. And I think that part of that is, where are the workers? Are they coming back into the city to work? Are they mixed? This was on a Tuesday, a Wednesday. So,
well, that's surprising to me, just because when I lived in Charlotte, it was nothing close to it was or is now. It was Charlotte has basically become kind of like a little miniature New York City compared to what it used to be. When I lived there, it was like starting to build up. It was just coming up, and it was a nice small city. I would not call Charlotte a small city anymore. But that's interesting. That's interesting. You would go in there at rush hour, and there wouldn't be as many people. I always ask people, and obviously I've kind of gone to a different, going from New Jersey to Florida. New Jersey, it was like a lot of people were still remote, depending on their job. Obviously, if you're a nurse, you have to be, in an office. You're in an office in a hospital. If you work some sort of a trade, you can't do that remotely. You're there, so it depends on what you do. But most people that are doing administrative or office or whatever type work, they up there at least were either remote or hybrid model. Down here, it's a little bit more. People are just. It's almost like nothing ever happened down here. People just go into their offices, and like one of my neighbors asked me, like, what do you, so what do you do for a living? Because I never like leave in the morning, or barely ever leave in the morning. And she was, I think I just needed to rest her mind that I'm not like a drug dealer or something.
Well, you just tell her, hey, it's a new
Colombian
economy.
drug lord.
That's right. I have my own YouTube channel. I produce content. I do podcasts, and
so it was a little odd for her to see that down here. So it's just a different culture. But I think a lot of places in the country, the hybrid model, again, I guess it depends where you're at, but it really is. It's almost like cloud in a way, right? People are, hey, you're going to go to cloud or not? And then people went all in with cloud and said, okay, it's cool, it's great, it's good for what it is, but we need a hybrid model. And I think maybe we're seeing the same thing here. There is a balance with work from home. But hey, look, if it is, hey, better for the environment, great. If there's less people on the road, and all of that. I mean, that's a win. And obviously, if traffic's better, that's even a bigger win.
Yeah, the one clear example that I remember from the early months of the pandemic was actually in India. Um, there was this one city, I don't know how large it was, um, but they're like 200 miles from the Himalayas. But for 30 years, they had not seen them because
Wow.
of the pollution and the smog and stuff like that. Now enter people staying home, not getting on the road, no commuting, that type of thing. And slowly but surely, that smog began to lift. And they, I remember seeing this out there, probably find it out there on the internet, but um, the Himalayas appeared, and they're like in awe of these massive mountains that are 200 miles away, mind you, but still look like they were like right there. But they hadn't seen them because of all the growing economy, growing population, and all the things that come with that. Uh, and it blocked out one of nature's most amazing, sights. Right? I mean, I've not seen the Himalayas personally, but I'm sure they're majestic. Just like my first time I saw the Grand Tetons. That's you've never seen those. Wow, just that's pretty cool. But yeah, just so there are definitely some benefits to the not being on the road as much. But I think also it comes down to company culture, right? I mean, and what you're trying to do. I mean, there's a notion of self-discipline, right? I mean, you have to discipline your time and effort, and if you're good at that, but if you need that collaborative thing, I mean, maybe you need that type of job. And I certainly, as one who's worked remotely for many years, I certainly crave the opportunity to be together with folks when I have the chance. Uh, but I can be just as productive, you know, working at home as I have for a long time. So, um, anyway, would I ever go back to an office job? I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. How about you?
Yeah. No, I'll be honest. I really do. I do appreciate the hybrid style. I mean, even if I were to go back to an office, it would have to be a hybrid type thing where I was, remote a few days a week, back in the office a few, because you got to break it up. I really think I think that's the best model, because it is good to get together with people. Then I think about like you and I talk multiple times a week at least. I don't know when's the last time we saw each other in person. I'm trying to think about this. Uh,
Kickoff?
was it?
Your
So it was.
kickoff?
Oh yeah, that's right. I saw you down in Nashville. I knew it was recent, but that was the first time since the beginning of the pandemic, right? Um, so
Yeah,
yeah,
I think so.
I think it's possible to still have some of that camaraderie, some of that thing over Zoom, Teams, whatever. But yeah, I think hybrid's a better model. But I think ultimately, I think kind of where we're talking about, we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about, basically just being a better steward of the environment, of resources, all these things we're talking about. It is a great way technology to be able to fill in that gap, and something like an IGEL can be a great way to extend the life of a device, to repurpose what you have. There's been so many customers I've worked with throughout the years. They were just going to throw stuff out. They were going to just dispose of it, whatever they do, recycle it, wipe it, whatever. Most of the time, they're just getting thrown in the trash, right? And it's like they were able to take that device that was deemed no good, and repurpose it and use it. So I think that ultimately there's a really good story here. There's a really great use, and look, all of us, pretty much anyone listening to this, is if you're working at a company, you probably have some kind of a basically you're being told, hey, look, we need to be better stewards. We need to recycle our devices when we used to throw them out, right? So this is a trend that's happening in the country. So I think these are just some really cool ways you could kind of extend the life of your devices. And if you can't, a company like Computers for Community, you can reach out to them. They can repurpose it and give it to somebody who can use it. So I think ultimately it's just a great thing overall. And yeah, I think Well, we're kind of running out of time here, Chris. So I guess we kind of have to. I guess we probably could keep going here, but it probably might be a good time to just kind of close this one down. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so if you're going to be a VMware Explorer next week, we'll have a session on this. I'll be on a panel with Jack Madden and another gentleman who's kind of taken the concept of managing mobile devices a little bit more efficiently. I've got an iPad here, for example, kind of repurposing mobile devices. Think about how many of those are out there, phones or iPads or tablets. That's a whole nother solution set. IGEL doesn't play in that space, but yeah, there's extrapolate that across, those things. So it should be a good conversation. Certainly, I'm looking forward to it. It's been a while since I've been out to San Francisco, but yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And we have lots of resources. There's this blog that we highlighted today from our friend James O'Regan. But there's plenty other things that I think we'll put into the podcast. You can look at these resources at your leisure. So
very good. And by the way, I should probably mention, if anyone's listening, if you haven't checked out the workshop we just did, so Chris and I were on with Lars Glockner, who does the IGEL Unified Communications documentation. The guy's brilliant when you get into UCC and all the different technologies. We had him on. He deep dove right into all that stuff, and I was blown away by some of the content. So check that out. It's on XenTegra's YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube and search XenTegra, you can find our channel there. Also, our workshop next month, we just hammered that one down. That'll be Control Up. So an old friend, Paul Bell, will be joining us, which will be really cool, and to take a look at that Edge DX solution. So stay tuned on that. We'll have more details. But yeah, Chris, appreciate it. Appreciate you jumping on. And as always, it's great talking to you. Maybe we'll see each other in person soon. I won't be at the VMware event. I was going to say VMworld, but I'm sure we'll catch up in person here soon. And everybody else, thank you for listening. This is episode 61, and we're going to go ahead and sign out.
All right. Take care.
Have a great week.